Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everyone. Today's Torah portion is Behar, which can be found. I'm not using my regular Chumash today, so I'm not sure what page it is in the blue book, but it's in Leviticus. I'll tell you which chapter it is in Leviticus. Okay, here we go. Chapter 25 in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, is a Torah portion of Behar. So let's begin by translating. First of all, hello everyone. I hope everyone is doing great. Feel free to type in any questions as we go along. Even though we're on Zoom, we're still a class and we could all communicate via class. So just type in any questions you have. So what does the word Bahar mean? Bahar means mountain. And the opening verse says, God spoke to Moshe at Mount Bahar, Mount Sinai. Thank you. 696 in the Blue Article Chumash. So this parsha was spoken at Mount Sinai. Now, why is that very interesting? Because we're actually counting the days of the Omer to get to Mount Sinai. We all know from Passover, the second day of Passover, the day after the first day, we start counting 49 days. And the 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot, the day we receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. And here in the opening verse, we have Mount Sinai mentioned. So we're going to take a minute to talk about Mount Sinai, which is this week's Torah portion, but at the same time, the holiday of Shavuot that we're anticipating and preparing for every single day for the count of the Omer. Just by the way, people always talk about a countdown. In Judaism, we count up. So yesterday was the 30th, today's the 31st, tomorrow will be the 32nd. We count up. We don't say 49 days to go, 48 days to go, 40, we go up. And it sounds like a trivial difference. What difference is if we started on counting from Passover and said, okay, 50 days to go, 49 days to go. But it's actually a very, there's a lot of meaning in even the slightest, smallest nuances of what we do as Jews. So when you say count down, let's say somebody has a wedding planned, right? Or people have a calendar, they rip out the day of the calendar and they come to the next and they crumple it up into ball and put it on the trash can. They come into their office, they rip off yesterday's day, we're ready for the new day. And they throw it in the trash can yesterday's day, they rip it off the calendar, right? That's what we're saying is, okay, the past is gone, we're going to dispose of it. Or 13 days to go to the vacation, 12 days to go. We're sort of like eliminating the days gone and just looking forward to the future. But the truth is that there's no future without a past. So any day we arrive at is the culmination of the journey that you got there. So we never dispose of the past. We never dispose of it. We always realize we're taking it with us. So today's the 31st day of the Omer. What we're saying is that today we have 31 days of preparation towards Mount Sinai, and hopefully tomorrow we'll have 32 days, meaning to say that we're always journeying forward, but we're not forgetting the past. We're not relinquishing the past. We're taking the past with us into the present and onto the future. So we're always linked. Our sight is set on the future. Our eyes are set on Mount Sinai at the holiday of Shavuot. That's the goal. That's the objective. The Jews were journeying in the desert from Egypt to Mount Sinai to get the Torah, but never forgetting the past, bringing the experiences and the memories with us. And it's just a practical thing to realize that, whoever you are today is the culmination of all the days that came before. And you're always taking those days with you. So, people often say, for example, I fell in love, right? And the longer you're married, 5-year anniversary, 10-year anniversary, right? So what you should be doing is rising in love. In other words, the more time you're married, the longer you've been, husband and wife, the deeper your bonds and your relationship becomes. So unlike, people sometimes say, oh, I fell in love, but then with time, sometimes that love dissipates. Oh, when we were madly in love, when we got engaged, we were like, wow, we couldn't stop thinking about each other all the time. But now I'm married 20 years, 30 years. It's not the same. No, rising in love means that you're getting stronger. You're getting closer to each other. So going back to Mount Sinai, which is the name of this week's Torah portion, the mountain. Rabbis discuss why God chose to give the Torah on a mountaintop. Now, obviously, it's very dramatic. Moses goes up to the mountain. Everyone can look up to the mountain. We all know King David says, I lift my eyes to the mountain. So it's very beautiful, a mountain. But that's not exactly what the rabbis tell us. The rabbis tell us that when God was looking for a mountain to give the Torah on, there was like a competition going on amongst the mountains. Who would be the one to be chosen that God should give the Torah on it? And each mountain that was large and majestic and grand and beautiful was claiming its right or entitlement to have the Torah given on it, because surely God will pick the biggest, strongest, most beautiful mountain, tallest mountain. Like if God wanted to give the Torah today, maybe he would go to Mount Everest, the biggest mountain, or one of the biggest mountains. But there was one little mountain, says the Midrash, that didn't even vie for the honor because it was the smallest mountain. Which mountain was that? Mount Sinai. And God said, that's the mountain I'm going to give it on, the smallest mountain. Why? Because God's teaching us that the prerequisite, the foundation for living a life of Torah and practice of Hashem's commandments must come from humility. A person who is humble is a worthy vessel for the Torah to reside inside of them. But a person who is arrogant and prideful and egotistical has no room for Torah in their life. They don't have the humility to absorb and heed the words of the Torah because they're so filled with themselves and their own ego and their own pride and their own arrogance. So Mount Sinai is like a contradiction. On the one hand, it's a mountain, which is tall and powerful and majestic. On the other hand, it's a humble mountain. And what the Torah is telling us is something very powerful. And that is that a person should be a combination of Mount Sinai. On the one hand, every person should be confident. Every person should be secure. Every person should feel worth and value and self-esteem. And yes, we should project ourselves in this world. We shouldn't be meek and timid and insecure and intimidated. No, as Jews, we have to stand tall and proud for who we are, for what we are. But at the same time that we're a mountain, we have to be a humble mountain. So God didn't give the Torah in a valley or in a plain because he wants us to be a mountain. But at the same time, God wants us to be humble. So you should be confident, but not arrogant. You should know who you are. You should know your strengths. You should know your abilities. Because if you don't know your abilities, you won't be able to use it, right? If you're I'll give you a simple analogy, right? Imagine you have a relative that dies, God forbid, and leaves you in their will $100 million. And the letter comes in your mailbox that you have inherited from your great aunt $100 million. But guess what? You never check your mailbox. So you have no idea that you inherited $100 million. So you go around living your life like an average person because you have no idea the wealth you have. So you don't know how to use it properly. Well, whatever God granted you, whatever wealth you have, whatever abilities, whatever talents, whatever skills, whatever gifts you possess, if you don't recognize them, how are you going to utilize them? So humility doesn't mean that you're self-effacing. Oh, I'm a nobody. I'm not good. No, on the contrary, you have to know your strengths, but you have to have the humility to also know your weaknesses. You have to have the humility to know that, okay, if I have these strengths, then that's a blessing and a responsibility to utilize them properly. Just like if you inherited $100 million, you have to use it to do good with it for others as well, not just for yourself. So Mount Sinai is the combination of strength, power, projecting yourself like a mountain, at the same time having the trait of humility. Moses was the greatest human being that ever lived, the greatest Jewish leader that ever lived. But at the same time, what does the Torah tell us? He was the humblest man on the face of the earth. It's not a contradiction to be both. Now, we then go on to what this week's Torah portion actually talks about. And it talks about the sabbatical year, which is the 7th year. The farmer should work 6 years and rest on the 7th year. What does this sound like? Shabbat. 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th day you shall rest. Well, in addition to 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th day you shall rest, Torah says that the farmer in Israel should work for 6 years and rest on the 7th year. So basically, it's a year-long Shabbat, and that's what the Torah says. Shabbat, Shabbaton Yel Aretz. It should be a sabbatical year for the land. Now, we know that in the Torah, when it talks about the laws of Shabbat, it says, you shall rest on Shabbat, your servants shall rest, and your animals shall rest. Part of the laws of Shabbat is that you're not allowed to work your animals on Shabbat. Think about that, how beautiful that is. Not only do your employees get a day off, your servants, but even your animals have to get a day off. That's right. The beauty of Shabbat extends beyond human rest. It extends to all of your employees, your servants, your maidservants, and also to your animals. Because yes, God says even animals are creatures, creations of God. And yes, your horse and your donkey and your ox, they need a day off too. Well, here it goes a step further. Not just your animals, but your land needs a year off. You can't just work your land continuously. You need to give the land a year of rest. Now, what does that mean? A land doesn't have a soul like a human or like an animal, that it gets fatigued or tired. What the Torah is saying is something interesting. First of all, yes, there is something, and if anyone knows the name, please type it in, but there is this concept in agriculture of rotation crop, where you don't work the same part of the land continuously, because yes, even a piece of land needs to rest to rejuvenate itself. So it can Shemitah, exactly. That's the Hebrew word for the sabbatical year. The sabbatical is Shemitah. V'shafta haaretz, the land shall rest, so it could produce better in the subsequent years. So try to imagine if a piece of land needs rest to replenish its strength and work better and produce more crop in the coming years, how much more we human beings need to have a day of rest. And when we say rest, it doesn't mean the day that you run errands, because that's not really a day of rest. Taking off from work on Saturday to go run errands all day is not exactly rest. What we do on Shabbat is really rest. We don't work in any way, shape, or form. We don't mow the grass on Shabbat, and we don't fix the roof, and we don't run to Home Depot to do this or that. It's a stress-free day, a day of peace and tranquility and all the things we want to do. Communion with Hashem, with our families, with our community, and so on and so forth. But there's another idea. The idea is also that it's funny because today a lot of these terms still exist. So in certain professions, especially like in professors and universities, or sometimes clergy members, have what's called a sabbatical. A sabbatical is where you take a whole year off and you just, don't work, you study, you do other things, you pursue your own personal interests rather than, so what the Torah says, ideally, every person should have a sabbatical. Who says you should work, from the day you get out of college till the day you retire, 50 years straight? No, every 7 years, take a year to explore, to broaden your horizons, to study, to do what interests you. Now, it's not a year like the day of Shabbat that you can't work. You could do it, but you could do what you want to do. You could spend it on your pursuits, your interests, to be more creative, not just to work constantly, to sort of step back and take a look, at your life and reevaluate things. And so, again, most people today don't have the luxury to take a sabbatical at all, let alone every 7 years. But what the Torah is telling us is that as human beings, besides having a day off, you need a year off, or you need an extended period of time to somehow replenish yourself. And therefore, the farmer would spend that year in pursuing things that were more significant and meaningful rather than just the day-to-day mundane task of working in the field. So that is the idea of the sabbatical year. But then the Torah takes it to the next level and says, okay, you count 7 years, you have the sabbatical year, now you count 7 cycles of 7. And after 7 sabbatical years, you come to the Jubilee year. Now, what is the Jubilee year? So if you had to put a theme on this week's Torah portion, someone said, okay, what's the theme of this week's Torah portion? So I would say the theme of this week's Torah portion is economics and poverty. How to run an economic system that eliminates poverty. Because that's the ideal. We know that poverty exists in the world, both in our country and around the world. There are impoverished nations. And the Torah addresses what's the best economic system that can provide for the maximum amount of people financial security. So there are many institutions built into the Torah to provide for the poor and needy. If you remember last week's Torah portion, we had the laws of leket, shikha, and peah. The farmer every year had to leave the corner of his field for the poor. And if he dropped bundles, he couldn't go back to retrieve it. He has to leave it to the poor and needy. And if he forgot to pick up some sheaves of grain, he couldn't go back to retrieve it. So you have all these systems in place to help for the poor. There's also the laws of the tithing. You have to give a percentage of your crop to the tithes for the poor. But here we have the idea of the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year, you couldn't work your field. And anything that grew was open to the public. Anyone can come and take whatever they want from your private field because it doesn't belong to you. God says in the 7th year, it's a year of rest. So it was another institution created to provide for the poor. Another aspect of the sabbatical year is the laws of lending money. The Torah says if you gave someone a loan during the sabbatical year, the loan is canceled. It's sort of like the laws of bankruptcy. We have a person's in debt and they can't get out of it, it's forgiven at a certain point. So they could have a second chance at being a financial success rather than being permanently weighed down by those debts that they can never get out of. So that's the institution of the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. Now, I'm talking about loans. When I said it's about economics and poverty and how to use economics in a way that is a blessing for as many people as possible so that nobody should have to live in destitution or poverty. One of the laws in this week's Torah portion, and it's not a very long Torah portion, only 57 verses, but one of the prohibitions in this week's Torah portion is not to loan money on interest. That if your brother needs a loan, your fellow Jew needs a loan, you should not charge them interest. It's forbidden to take interest. And you may have heard of a Gemilat Chesed fund, or English, it's called a free loan society. Jewish communities have always had, and if you go to communities around the world today, most synagogues or Jewish communities have a free loan society. So somebody needs a little money to get over a situation, they could get a loan from the free loan society and no interest is taken, which should not be taken for granted because in our economic system, it's just the opposite. In other words, if you're a rich man or a rich woman and you go to the bank and you want to borrow money, I don't know what the interest rate today is, but they'll charge you 4%, 5%, 6%, whatever the rate is. But if you go to the bank and you're a poor person and you have a bad credit score because you're struggling and you have a very low income, they're going to charge you. If you want a loan, you're going to have to go to a loan provider that's going to take 10% or 15%, or some credit cards could take as high as 20 or 25%. So the poorest people are paying the highest interest rates. The Torah says just the opposite. If somebody's poor and they need a loan, don't charge them any interest. If you have means, you have money sitting in the bank, as they say, you're sitting on money that you're not using, loan it to that person without any interest. Do a mitzvah with your money. And by the way free loan societies work today is exactly that way. How do you do the free loan mitzvah? If you have what they call disposable cash, right? I have an extra $50,000 sitting around. I don't really need it. I'm not going to need it for the next 10 years. So I go to the free loan society and say, I'm willing to give you this money for 10 years. And you could loan it out to people, 5,000 here, 3,000 there. And then I'll come back in 10 years, you'll give me back my 50,000. So you did the mitzvah of giving free loans through the free loan society. It doesn't cost you anything. You're foregoing the interest that you could have gotten in the bank or in the stock market. But basically, you get all your money back. And we know that Maimonides says one of the highest forms of charity is giving someone a job or giving someone a loan. So it's ironic that the highest forms of charity don't even cost you anything because you get it back. Why do you get it back? Because when a poor person comes to you for charity, the obvious thing they're lacking is money, funds. But you know what else they're lacking? Dignity, self-esteem, self-worth. How does it feel for a human being, God forbid, to have to come and ask for charity? We say in the Birkat HaMazon, every time we eat a meal, lo lidei matnas basar v'dam. We don't want to have to be reliant and dependent on the gifts of human beings of flesh and blood. No human being wants to have to take from another human being. It's basic self-worth and dignity. But if I give you a loan, I'm not robbing your dignity. I'm saying it's a loan. You have to pay me back. So that is one of the mitzvahs to deal with poverty in this week's Torah portion. So going back to the sabbatical year, the food in the field is open to the public. Anyone who's poor can come and take. Loans are forgiven. What happens in the Jubilee year? And by the way, there's a verse in this week's Torah portion that's a very famous verse. It's on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. And what does the verse say? Proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. That verse is in this week's Torah portion. When it says the Jubilee year comes, two things would happen in ancient Israel. First of all servants, all slaves, and by the way, a Jewish slave is not like slavery that we think of. Jewish law says there's two ways a person could become a slave. Either they can't provide for themselves, so they sell themselves into servitude, or they stole something they can't afford to pay back, so they have to be sold to pay it back. But the master has to treat the servant with the utmost respect. As I said, he gets the day off on Shabbat just like the master. But even more that Jewish law says, if the master only has one, the owner has one bed, one pillow, one blanket, he has to give it to the servant before he uses it. He can't eat till he feeds his servants. It's a responsibility. And that's a general perspective about economics and wealth. Wealth is, people say, oh, he's privileged, meaning he has money. Or he has whatever, he grew up privileged. Judaism would say it's more than a privilege, it's a responsibility, how to utilize it properly. So, because Judaism says that your money should be viewed not as your possessions, it's not ownership, it's guardianship. It's like you're a trustee. God gave you these resources and you're a trustee for God to utilize them properly. And that's why, how can God tell me not to work my field on the 7th year or in the Jubilee year I shouldn't work the field? Because God says right here in this week's Bible, because the earth is mine. Whose land is that? You think it's your land? It's your real estate? It's my real estate. Because who made the world? I made the world. So it belongs to me. You know, the first story in the Torah is in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, is the Torah a history book? No, Torah is a book of laws. The word Torah means instruction, hurrah. So it's a book of laws. What do I need to know how God created the world in 6 days? Well, I need to know the law that I have to keep Shabbat. But that's Shabbat. Why do I have to know about the creation of the world? Because that's a law too. Since God created the world, my land is God's land. He made that land. I didn't make that land. Maybe I own it right now, but ownership doesn't really mean ownership. It means you were entrusted with it. And therefore you have to leave the corners of your field to the poor, and the leket and the shikha, and in the 7th year you can't work the field. Anyone can come and take whatever grows. In the Jubilee year you can't take what's there. So, but here's where it gets even more interesting. I'm sure you've heard in real estate, there's a sale, and then there's something called a land lease, where sometimes you don't buy something, you lease it, 100-year lease, whatever period of time. In the land of Israel, the maximum amount of time you could buy real estate land is for 49 years. In the 50th year, the shofar is blasted, and the original owners come back and take their land. You got to move out. Okay? Again, we talked about this week's parsha is about economics. So let's say your grandfather owned a piece of land, and then he fell on hard times and he had to sell the land. And now your family doesn't have a piece of land to work and provide for your family. So will that mean that all future generations will remain destitute? No. Comes the 50th year, the land goes back to the original owners. So everyone gets a second chance. So when you buy a piece of land, you're only getting it till the Jubilee year. This is, again, another way to balance out the haves and the have-nots, that people can rebuild themselves after financial ruin and come back. And like bankruptcy laws, is like the sabbatical year. It abolishes loans, give a person a second chance. This is the idea of the land. And God says, it's my land. I let you have it for 49 years, but you have to give it back. No, it's not played out today. It was only in the time of the temple. And you're asking a very good question. The sabbatical year is played out. Farmers in Israel do not work the land in the 7th year. At least religious farmers do not work the land in the 7th year. And that is something that's still practiced today. And this year is a sabbatical year in Israel. So right now, they're not working the land. However, the Jubilee year, it says only, one of the things we're going to see is that it was the Bet Din, it was the court. By the way, I may be making a mistake. It could be last year was the sabbatical year. I think it was last year. But the Jubilee, it says the court, the Sanhedrin, the high court shall count the 49 years to the 50th year. So our rabbis say that as long as there is a high court, a Sanhedrin, a holy temple, then the laws of Jubilee are in effect. If not, they're not in effect. So Jubilee is not in effect. Another law of the Jubilee year was that all slaves were freed. That's why the line in the Liberty Bell says, proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. You have to relinquish all your servants. Everyone regains their freedom. So once again, it's not a life circumstance that you're in slavery or in servitude. It's up to the 49th year maximum. And by the way, it doesn't mean you work for 49 years. If you buy a slave or a servant in year 27, comes year 50, he goes out. If you buy him in year 46, he goes out in 3 years. Now, again, slavery sounds bad, but it's not slavery. I always think of it like, some people translate it as an indentured servant, but you think about somebody who's a live-in or a full-time housekeeper or a nanny. He manages the affairs of the owner, but he has his full rights and dignity and treated not like God forbid, like a possession. He's treated like I said, if you come into a Jewish home and there's one bed and one person sleeping on the bed, the other person sleeping on the floor, and I told you one is the master and one is the servant, it's the servant on the bed, because Jewish law says he gets it first. So the question that was just asked was, how does it apply today? I'm assuming you're asking, how does the free, the land and the servants? So the Jubilee is not in effect today anymore. So those do not. It's not done that way. That land in Israel, you buy a piece of land, I think it's yours permanently. but there is no reversal of property. But the way I think it plays out in spirit is what the Torah is trying to tell us is that what we own should never be viewed as ours. God gave you this blessing, but it's meant to be shared with others and utilized for the maximum benefit of as many people as possible. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm sure I've told this before. You may or may not have heard this, but it's a true story. There was once a group of philanthropists from America, wealthy American philanthropists, who went on a trip to Israel. And one of them was the owner of Starbucks, Schultz. Is his name? What was his first name? Howard Schultz. And these wealthy philanthropists were doing a tour of Israel. And someone said, we should take you to the biggest yeshiva in Israel. The biggest yeshiva in Israel is the Mirror Yeshiva. It's a yeshiva in Jerusalem. And it has, without exaggeration, like 7,000 or 8,000 students. I once went into it when I was learning there. It's like a sea of students studying. The amount of Torah study in the hall, it's like something you can't imagine what it looks like. 7,000 students. And the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, was Rabbi Tzvi Frankel at the time. He was the rabbi. And someone said, why don't we set up a meeting between these philanthropists and Rabbi Tzvi Frankel, the Rosh Yeshiva? And they came into his, Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, told us, obviously, they came into his study and the rabbi met them and started talking to them. And then he asked them, tell me, what is the lesson of the Holocaust? And he ran around the table and everyone said something else. You know, we need a strong IDF, never again, anti-Semitism, this, that, and that. And Rabbi Tzvi Frankel said, this is what I believe the lesson of the Holocaust is, that I want to share with you. He said, think about these Jews. You know, they were rounded up from their cities or from the ghettos. They were taken to the train stations. They were deported to the concentration camps. When they came to the camps, there was a line to the left, to the right. Some were sent to their death right away. Men and women, children were separated from their parents. He says, imagine that after traveling in the cattle car, many didn't even survive. They died in the cattle car. And cold winters, horrible, tragic. And then when they arrived, there was these Nazis with dogs and lights and screaming at them, Schnell, rechts, links. You know. And finally, if a Jew survived all of that, he went into the barrack. On the night that he arrives in Auschwitz or, you know, Buchenwald, wherever camp this poor Jew arrived. And they come into the barrack, and you've seen pictures of the barracks, a couple of planks of whatever wood. And these Jews had to climb onto these little planks and fall asleep because they were physically exhausted. Physically, emotionally, mentally, totally. He says, now on each plank of wood, there was like one blanket. But sometimes 3 or 4 Jews would huddle onto one plank of wood. And there was only one blanket. And the person who got the blanket first, what he did was he unfurled the blanket and spread it out as far as he could to cover as many Jews as he can. And Rabbi Frankel said to these wealthy philanthropists, he says, that's what it means to be a Jew. That if God gave you a big blanket, you spread it out to cover as many people, to keep as many people warm as possible. Now, where does that mindset come from? The word tzedakah is always translated as charity, but it really comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. Charity is an act of justice. If God gave you an abundance and gave somebody else less than what they need, you have a moral, just obligation. It's not just, oh, I'm charitable, I deserve a great big plaque because I decided to give charity. You did what you're supposed to do. Why? Because we don't see ourselves as owners of anything. And the fact is, we only have it for a short period of time. Even if you have a long life, it's still relatively short. Ultimately, we're just stewards. We're just guardians. We're just custodians of God's possessions. And therefore, we have to know it's not really ours. We have to utilize it for the maximum benefit of as many people. Now, there are laws. You don't have to give away all your money to charity, but you have to give what you're required to give. And therefore, a lot of the laws of the Torah is built around how to. Judaism believes in capitalism. Judaism believes that everyone should work hard, and the harder you work, the more you earn and the more you have. But at the same time, as Hillel said, if I am only for myself, what am I? If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? So there are many, many laws about how to build a society, a nation that cares for everyone, those less fortunate as well. Now, we live in America today, so we have taxes, which is like a forced form of giving, that the government uses some of the funds that they collect for taxes, for social services, for the poor, for the needy, whatever it may be. So there is that structure going on automatically. But here, this is a voluntary gift, and the more you understand that what you have is not yours to keep for yourself, but it was entrusted to you to be used for the benefit of others, the happier you actually are. Because the greatest joy is realizing Hashem gave me these blessings and I could share them with others and utilize it to be a blessing for others. So it's not only true with money, it's true with any ability or any blessing that we have in our lives. So these are some of the examples of the sabbatical and the Jubilee year, which is all meant to teach us how to care for those less fortunate. Another great example of caring for others in this week's Torah portion is there's a verse that says, and I'm going to read the verse and it's going to sound like charity, but I'm going to show you what the rabbis say. The rabbis say, if your brother becomes impoverished. Now, one of the words you're going to find a lot in this week's Torah portion is your brother. What the Torah is trying to tell us is you're a mashpacha, your family. If your family member, you have a cousin or an uncle or a nephew or a niece, and they're having a hard time financially, and they call you, and you have the ability to help them, of course you're going to help them. It's my family, of course. We feel very close to our family. We want to help our family. And the Jewish mindset is we're all family. Look what's going on in Ukraine and how much money Jews sent for other Jews, right? Because we have this understanding we're all family. And that extends to all human beings in a sense, because if we have a Father in heaven, God is our Father in heaven to all of mankind, then we're all brothers and sisters because we have one Father in heaven, so we're all children. But the idea of understanding there's no such thing as a stranger. This is your brother, this is your sister, this is your fellow human being. Surely your fellow Jew, which is literally your mashpacha. We Jews come from a family. God didn't say, I want the most righteous people, the most elite people. He said, I want this family and all the future descendants of this family. So we are literally all related to each other, going back. So therefore, God says, if your brother becomes impoverished, umatayado, his means falter in your proximity. Says the verse, you shall strengthen him. Now, what is this commandment? Your brother becomes impoverished, you shall strengthen him. What does it say? You should give him charity. What does it mean you should strengthen him? So listen to what the rabbis say. The rabbis use a very cute analogy. The rabbis say, if a donkey carrying a load collapses, you need 5 people to lift the donkey up. But that's only after the donkey has already fallen. What happens when the donkey starts wobbling and shaking? One person could come along as it's starting to fall, put up his hands, and stabilize the donkey that it shouldn't collapse. So rabbis tell us something which is so practical, and that is, don't wait for the donkey to fall. Once a person falls into poverty and they're evicted from their apartment and they lose their business and they lose everything, it's 5 times harder to rehabilitate that person. It takes 5 times as much effort and resources to rehabilitate them. But if you get in before they fall, like the donkey that's starting to falter, that's why the verse says, when your brother becomes impoverished and his means falter, he's starting to shake. He missed a payment on his rent or on his car, right? Once his car is repossessed, he can't get to work and he gets fired, and then he can't pay his rent and he gets evicted. Now it's a big problem. But all he needed was a few $100s to pay his car payments. He could keep his job and pay it back, right? So don't wait till the person collapses. Help them when they're starting to falter. Sometimes we get involved when it's a little too late or after the fact. And by the way, this is not only about money. This is true in every life. Take a child who's struggling in school, right? Early detection right? Okay, this kid's having a problem. Let's get him help, right? Could set the kid on an amazing path for the rest of his life. But if the kid is neglected and not given the care they need, they could drop out of school, and then they get involved in drugs, and then they end up in crime. And before you know it, he becomes a hardcore criminal. It didn't have to happen. If somebody would have realized he's struggling, he's poor, he's impoverished, he's weak, he's faltering, let's reinforce him when it's still early. Don't wait till they collapsed and fell on their face, and then it takes much more. But human nature is like, once somebody is completely, off the rails, then everyone wants to save them. Try to notice who needs help early on before things, go sour. So that's the idea of strengthening the person when they begin to falter, when they need help. One of the main ideas in this week's Torah portion is, if somebody does buy a servant and a relative comes along and wants to redeem that person, he says, I'll pay the ransom, I'll pay the bail, I'll pay, even though I purchased this person. Or the same thing with a field, I could force you to return it. So let's say, God forbid, somebody's poor and he has to sell a field, or he has to sell himself into slavery. But now a relative comes along and says, I could help him out now. I have some money. I want to buy him back. I want to buy the field back. The owner must sell. He's entitled to get his money back based on the amount of years. So if he bought him for X amount of years, and then the relative comes, but relatives are obligated to try to redeem their loved ones, either their field or themselves. The Torah talks about the different next of kin, who is obligated. And the punchline of the whole Torah portion is a verse that we're very familiar with, which says, because Hashem says, the Jewish people are my servants. I took them out of Egypt. I made them free to come to Mount Sinai and live free lives. That's the line from the Liberty Bell: proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. And that's an American value. Every human being is entitled to live as a free human being, not subjugated to any other human being. And even if a person has to go into a temporary measure of being a servant to someone else, the relatives should try to redeem them as early as possible. And if not, they go out during the sabbatical year. By the way, that the slave could only work 6 years, not in the sabbatical year, but they work 6 years, the 7th year. But the Jubilee is an automatic correction that sets everybody free. It's interesting to note that we're now in the days of counting the Omer, and there's a 49-day count to get to the holiday of Shavuot, when we got the Torah at Mount Sinai. The Parsha also talks about a 49-year count, not day count, but year count, till we get to the sabbatical year, which is the Jubilee year that we're discussing in this week's Torah portion. Now, the word Yovel has many different meanings. In English, we say Jubilee, which is the same as Yovel, Jubilee. But Yovel, Rashi says it means like a shofar, because they blasted the shofar. At Mount Sinai, it says B'mshocha Yovel, when they blew the shofar. So one meaning of Yovel, Jubilee, because what does Jubilee mean? In Hebrew, it means the shofar blast, because the shofar was blown throughout the land. Now, the question is, why in the 50th year, to herald in the Jubilee, did they blow the shofar? And here rabbis say an interesting answer. They say that, I'll give it to you in Hebrew, Sarat Rabim Chatzi Nechama, an affliction of the community or the public or everyone is a half of consolation, a half of a comfort. What does that mean? Just like when you share something joyous with other people, it's a greater joy, right? Why do you invite a lot of people to your wedding or to your bar mitzvah or whatever? Because if you celebrate by yourself, it's not as joyous. Bring a lot of people together, the joy is great. It's double the joy. But it's true in the other way. When you have a problem, but you know you're not alone in the problem, knowing that other people are having the same struggle makes the load and the burden a little easier. Why do people go to support groups? Well, they want to get advice. But more than that, they want to get encouragement. When I sit in a circle with people who have the same struggle I have, whatever it may be, God forbid, there's bereavement groups, right? I know I'm not alone. I'm not the only person going through this. That in itself brings a measure of comfort. And our rabbis say the same thing is true with the shofar blowing. You know, a person has a land, a field, a person has servants, and like this, he has to let go of his land, he has to let go of his servants, and he may feel like I just lost everything. So blowing the shofar, proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. When you hear the shofar blast, you know, I'm not the only one giving up my servants and my land. Everyone is doing the same thing. We're all doing it together. And just knowing that brings a measure of comfort. And therefore, it's the idea of the strength of a community, that whether it's for blessings or for hardships and challenges, whenever you're united with the community, there's a tremendous power and strength and blessing that comes from that. The other interpretation of the word Yovel means to transfer, because properties and servants are all transferred back. One other distinction between the counting of the Omer versus the counting of the Jubilee year. Every night of the Omer, we say a blessing and we count the Omer. Today we counted 31. Tonight we'll count 32. Why? Because the Torah says you shall count for yourselves, which means every individual Jew has to count the 49 days of the Omer. But when it comes to the Jubilee year, this week's Torah Bush, it doesn't say you should count for yourselves in the plural. It says you should count for you, singular. Why? Because not every Jew has to count and know which year of the cycle it is towards the Jubilee year. Only the High Court would do it on behalf of the Jewish people. And here there's an interesting lesson to be learned from that. You know, if I ask you, what are you doing this afternoon? You could tell me what you're doing this afternoon. I could ask you what you're doing tomorrow. You could tell me. Maybe if I ask you what you're doing next week, you know, a month from now. Maybe if you have something planned, a vacation for 6 months, you know what you're doing. Some people in business have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, right? The Jubilee year is a 50-year plan. It's a 50-year plan. And what the Torah is saying is, yeah, individuals count days, weeks, months, 49 days, 7 weeks. You know, that's normal. But if you're a leader, and a leader doesn't just mean you have a role as a leader. It means you're a leader in your family, you're a leader in your community, you're a leader in your business, wherever you're a leader. You have to think of what is good, not just for yourself and immediate gain. You have to make decisions based on what's good for my children, what's good for my grandchildren, what's going to be for my great-grandchildren, right? And that's the idea of thinking long-term, the Jubilee year. And it's fascinating to look back at Jewish history and think about things that we still do today, because great leaders had the foresight to make certain decisions that changed the whole course of history. And sometimes they knew that they wouldn't even see the benefit. You know what it's like, the story of the man planting a carob, old man, the Talmud tells a classic story. An old man is planting a carob tree. And someone comes along and says, what are you doing? He says, I'm planting a carob tree. He says, you're so old, you're never going to live to eat the fruit of the carob tree, because apparently carob trees take a long time many, many years to grow fruit. And the old man looked at the young man and he said, those who came before me planted for me. I will plant for those who come after me. So we reap the fruit of decisions that were made many years ago that we're benefiting from today. And the same thing is, yes, you have to have a plan for the immediate, but more importantly, what's your long-term plan? And a person who can think about what is in the best interest of my family, not today, but in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, that's a whole different perspective. And when you think about Judaism, you think about Moshe Rabbeinu after the Exodus from Egypt, what does he tell the Jews? You shall, every year on the anniversary of Passover, you should have a Passover Seder. You should sit with your family and tell them the story of Jewish history and your Jewish identity and how you went out of Egypt and the miracles and the plagues. And it blows my mind every time that here we are, 3,334 years later, and just a few weeks ago, everyone sat at a Seder. Why? Because Moshe said, okay, if I want them to remain Jewish and remember their story, who they are and where they come from, there has to be this conversation every year at the Seder table from parents to children to grandchildren. So do things that will have everlasting benefits. You can look at the modern state of Israel. You know, the leaders who said, okay, we need to go and build Eretz Yisrael because we need a place to be a safe haven for Jews around the world. And no longer will Jews have to be victims to the whims of other, the whims of other countries and be, you know, subject to a persecution and oppression. Or in religious life, think about when the temple was destroyed. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai negotiated with Vespasian, and he said, okay, you're going to destroy Jerusalem, the temple, leave the city of Yavne and the scholars who will teach Torah, because he knew with Torah study, Judaism will go on even without the temple. And sure enough, for 2,000 years in exile, we still have Judaism because of the Torah study. So very critical decisions that go beyond the life of the individual making that decision, because if you're lucky, you live one Jubilee. Most people don't live 100 years, so you don't get two Jubilees, metaphorically, meaning each 50-year cycle. But we have to think beyond ourselves. That's what leaders are responsible to do. Someone just texted in that Native Americans say they think about 7 generations. There's a woman in our shul. I won't mention her name. Not that there's anything wrong. Maybe I should mention her name. Her name is Pearl Ginsburg. She's now 95 years old. Thank God she's doing great. But her story was that when she got married 70 years ago, she and her husband lived in some community, a very nice community, a suburban community, but there was no like synagogue there. There was no like Jewish life there. It was suburban. And she says they started having young kids. She had little kids. And she said to her husband, I want to move to a religious community so our kids could have a shul to walk to on Shabbat and a school and everything. And they looked into, her husband wasn't, you know, that religious and she wasn't that religious, but she said, this is important to me. And when they looked into Great Neck, New York, where she ended up money, it turns out that the houses were more expensive. And in the countryside, wherever she lived in the suburban area, she had this big, beautiful house on a big piece of land and everything. And I was said, yeah, for the same money, we're going to get this much smaller house without much, a little garden in the front of our house. And she said, I don't care. I'd rather have a smaller house, but at least my kids will grow up in a religious community and know they're Jews and not assimilate. And her husband went along with it. So listen, if you're happy you're there, fine. Today, she's going to the weddings of her grandchildren, all yeshiva educated, religious boys, marrying, building Jewish families. And she says to me, she says, I look back at the decision I made 70 years ago, and I see the results because I moved my children, and now my grandchildren all grew up in observant communities. So sometimes you can make a decision that has everlasting ramifications. So the Jubilee teaches us to think long-term, not just to think about the, you know, we're very conditioned today to think about the immediate gain. We're very much an instant gratification society, short attention spans, technology. We're always very quick. Everything's happening very fast. You know, the news has a one-day shelf life until there's new news that pushes away the old news. You have to realize, you know what, not everything is just fleeting and transient. Some things, some decisions we make in life are forever. And we can make the right decisions. And like who we marry, the way we raise our children, you know, which communities we live in, what endeavors we get involved in, what we devote our life to has internal ramifications. So the Jubilee, it tells us to think about the long events, consequences, and try to make decisions that will have eternal positive repercussions, because some decisions we make don't have any everlasting impact, but others can have very long impact. So that's what the Jubilee as well teaches us about. So wishing everyone a beautiful day, and thank you for joining this class. And just to remind you, on Thursday morning, Yossi and Sierra Dworkin invite everyone to the bris of their son, which will be at 9:30 at the synagogue. So everyone's welcome to join for that happy occasion. And Lag BaOmer, please, 2 Lag BaOmer events. We have Wednesday night at the Morse. You could sign up to bring some joy. There'll be a cantor and music at the Morse, at the Traditions. And on Thursday at the Rec Center here in Palm Beach, we have another big celebration. I look forward to seeing everyone. So on Lag BaOmer, you can come Wednesday night to the Morse, Thursday morning to the Bris, and Thursday afternoon to the Rec Center. Wishing everyone a joyous and a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.
Hi, Gloria.
Hi.
Oops, I better unmute.
I know. It's just us.
Crazy, huh? How are you?
Good. Wait, Gloria, unmute.
Gloria, unmute. Lower left hand. There you
There she
go.
Good.
is.
Good.
Hi.
I am. Look at all the events I'm missing. Come on.
Oh, I need you at my Morse event.
Oh boy. How is Sarah?
She's great.
Oh, beautiful. That picture with Ellie. Is it Ellie or Eli?
Ellie,
Oh,
Ellie holding. Oh my God, it's priceless.
isn't it?
It's so beautiful.
Hey, Myra, what do you think they'd like for a brisk present? You know,
I would say money.
okay.
I mean, because they're going to be like, you know, I mean, they have to have baby stuff, so.
Okay.
I can't think of like anything that they like kind of stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
You're kind of hollow sounding there, just FYI.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't usually talk in my computer. I always talk on my phone. But I
Oh,
wanted to say hi to you two ladies.
hi. Hey, I signed up for the Morse thing. I just went directly
Thank
to
you.
and clicked there rather than, you know, lots more
Thank you.
communique.
That's
Okay.
so nice.
I hear you. All
Wow.
right, we have a second thing, so I'm going to end the Zoom that oh God, we're on Facebook right now. We're not on Facebook. Let me end my